Welcome, everyone. We're going into a week which is a double header, Behar, Bechukotai, the last two portions of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, which means that this Shabbat, at the end of the Torah reading, we will all call out Chazak, Chazak, Venit Chazek, let us be strengthened, let us take strength. We always end on a high and give ourselves strength to begin the next book, the next week, anew. We're going to go through the summary of today's events, of this Shabbos' events, and then we will go through some of the life messages. The first of the two portions, Parshas Behar, speaks about the fact that everyone gathered together at Sinai. It says that every single person was gathered at Sinai, and they were given the following mitzvah. The mitzvah of Shemitah, which is the sabbatical year. 6 years you will work, and in the 7th year, the Shemitah year, no work on the field. The produce is left for all the people and for animals. So it's left for anybody who is in need of food. The land becomes ownerless for that 7th year. Anyone can partake of it. Then it speaks about what happens at the end of 7 such cycles. 7 times 7, the year following that would be the Jubilee year, the Yovel year. Again, no work is done in the field, but in addition to that, that year triggers the fact that any servant or slave, when it comes to the 50th year, he goes free. So even a person who elected to stay beyond his time that he was sold as a slave, and there's a whole story. We had his ear is bored into the doorpost to remind him that we're meant to be slaves of God, servants of Hashem, not of another human being, but he elected to stay behind. Comes the Jubilee year. A lot of things happen no matter what, whether you like it or not. They return to the original state. There's rebooting, resetting, and it's all slaves go free. Land returns to original owners. So even if you sold land, it belongs to your tribe, it belongs to the family. If you sold land, it was only till the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year could be a year or two after you did the sale or bought the slave, because the Jubilee year is an independent cycle, independent of what activity you did. It's the 50th year for everybody. Then it speaks about generally laws relating to the sale of land. The price of sale depends on the year till Yovel. Obviously, if you're buying land and you know that in 2 years' time it's a Jubilee year, you're not going to pay top dollar. You're going to pay for what would be prorated to the use of the land for 2 years. If it was now 49 years or 48 years till the next Jubilee year, the price would be more because you would have more use of the land till the Jubilee year. Then it speaks about generally having ethical conduct in our business practices, that we're not allowed to defraud anybody, we're not allowed to cause anybody harm by misrepresenting the facts in a business deal. And then it says Hashem will bless the 6th year's harvest to provide for 3 years. Why does it have to provide for 3 years if we're only talking about having a sabbatical year, a rest year, for 1 year? So why for 3 years? Because the 6th year is also affected, because what you would plant towards the end of the 6th year, there's no point in planting because it's only going to grow in the 7th year. And what you would plant towards the end of the year, 7th year, will grow in the 8th year, which is the first year of the next cycle. So likewise, you wouldn't be able to partake of that because it's coming from the 7th year. So in actual fact, it doesn't impact full 3 years, but it impacts a 7th year and a little bit of the 6th year and a little bit of the year that follows. If there's a Jubilee year, then it affects more time, because the 49th year is a multiple of 7. So you would have the sabbatical year, and the year following that would be a Jubilee year. You go from a sabbatical year into a Jubilee year, you have 2 years, and that in fact will then affect 4 years, not just 3. So practically land can only be leased until the Jubilee year. You never ever buy land forever. Even in Israel today, there's no such thing as buying land forever. The land belongs to the Keren Kayemet L'Israel, Kakal, and I think there's a maximum lease hold of 99 years, not forever. And the wording that is used is you are strangers and you'll be a resident. We'll come to those two. This is an oxymoron. We're resident and we're also strangers. And in what way are we each of those seemingly contradictory terms? Then it says land can be redeemed by the seller or relative after 2 years from the date of purchase. So we now talk about a situation where you could actually redeem land back if you've sold it, can you redeem it back? And there's different laws that relate to land, and then it relates to homes in walled cities. They may only be redeemed up to 1 year after the sale and not thereafter. And so it's quite technical. Property allocated to the Levim is always redeemable. There were certain cities and certain places that was allocated to the Levim. They, as a tribe, did not get a division of the land because they worked for the whole of Bnei Israel in the temple. They did a lot of service on behalf. So the Kohanim and the Levim were supported by the Jewish people. They didn't have their own land. They did have towns and cities in which they lived. Then it says you should assist our brothers. Not after, obviously, yes, after, but don't wait until somebody is dependent on charity. Assist people before they become poor. It's easier to support somebody who's about to fall than to pick them up when they've fallen. So always watch to see if you could be the support that somebody doesn't have to fall and then come to charity. Maybe there's a loan or somehow a financial support that happens prior to the business faltering completely. Okay, then it speaks about interest. We're not allowed to charge interest, and we're not allowed to pay interest to a fellow Jew, neither. Then it says you will treat your slaves respectfully and do not subject them to demeaning labor. So there's a whole lot of laws that apply to how one treats a slave. We discourage purchasing a slave, but the Talmud says that if you so decide and you do buy yourself a slave, you've actually bought yourself a master, because the labor laws are so extensive. What type of work can you ask them to do? It has to be meaningful. It can't be causing the person to be demeaned. The person has to be eating the same food that you eat and sleeping in the same type of residence that you sleep. So the medical aid. So there are so many responsibilities that the Talmud says you're better off, even for your own purposes, not to buy a slave, because in so doing you buy yourself a master. Then it speaks about the mitzvah to redeem a slave. And that would obviously be determined by how many years till the yovel, because the person who has a slave is going to have to let that slave go free anyway in the Jubilee year. So how much time he still has as a master of the slave would then determine the price that a person coming to redeem that slave would have to pay. That is the first portion, which is Behar. And then finally, Bechukotai, which is the last portion of the book of Leviticus. It says that there will be blessing if we diligently study Torah and observe all the mitzvahs. What kind of rewards? We'll get rain, security, peace, success, wealth. It lists all the things that will happen if we walk in the statutes and in the ways that Hashem wants to. But if, God forbid, we choose to abandon Hashem, there are very harsh consequences. And then the Torah lists so many problems that could befall, God forbid, a person: disease, famine, enemy, occupation, exile, desolation of the land. It's called the Teichacha, and it happens twice in the whole Torah. Once is a week before the week, the Shabbos before Shavuot, and the week before the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. Those are the two times that we read a section from the Torah which talks about horrific consequences that could, God forbid, befall a human being because they haven't behaved appropriately. And what happens on Shabbos, you might think that you need to tell the person reading the Torah to read louder. It's this section that we read in an undertone, a little bit softer, and we rush it. We don't sing it with great drama because the contents is very painful. But then it reminds us at the end of that whole section that Hashem will never abandon us. And then it speaks about if a person makes a pledge, how we evaluate what the pledge is. If he says a number of how much he pledges to give to the temple, that's the number. But if he says, I give the value of such, then you have to calculate what would the value of that person. He says, I want to give my own value, the value of me, to the temple. How do you work out the value of a person? So it basically goes like one would use today to establish damages if, God forbid, a person is harmed. What is the earning capacity and the financial value, which is impossible to really attribute to life, but how can you determine and evaluate value so that you know what tzedakah to give? When redeeming a pledge of the temple, Like if you have given something to the temple and instead of giving that item, you want to give money, sometimes we have to redeem because the item that was consecrated, for example, a donkey, cannot be given to the temple because the temple has no use for a donkey. There are specific animals that are used in the service at the temple. So if you have to redeem an item that you've given, then you don't just redeem it for its value, it's value plus 1/5. So that you actually have a margin that you add on so that you never come to err, God forbid, and you didn't calculate properly. And in the end, you've done something really terrible, and that is you've defrauded the temple. You've actually taken what is the value of the temple. So we get a buffer. That is, if you ever redeem something that belongs to the temple, you have to add a 1/5. Then it speaks about firstborn animals that have to be consecrated and given to the temple. It speaks about the second tithe. There, in fact, a whole lot of gifts that a farmer would give. He would give truma, which was either 40th or 50th or 60th, depending on the person's generosity to the Kohen. He would then give a tithe to the Levi. And then there was a second tithe that was sometimes given to the poor, and sometimes it had to be taken to Jerusalem and eaten in Yerushalayim. And then it speaks about all the animal tithes. It's a whole lot relating to charity. And that's how we end the whole book of Leviticus, Vayikra. And we will then call out, Chazak, Chazak, Benit Chazak, let us be strengthened. Let's go on a journey of some of the things that we can take from the Torah reading. So one of the famous questions, which Rashi actually quotes, is that it says, and God spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu on the mountain of Sinai, saying, and he gives us the law of what? We said, the law relating to the sabbatical year, the 7th year. So the question that is asked in the Midrash, and quoted by Rashi, is why suddenly do we say that this mitzvah was given at Sinai? Where were all the other mitzvahs given? Everything was given at Sinai. Sinai was the place that everything originated from. So why do you say that this mitzvah, the sabbatical year, was given at Sinai? Why is it selected to give us this background that was given at Sinai when all 613 commandments were given at Sinai? So the Midrash answers that just as in the case of the sabbatical year, both its general principle and its minutiae detail, all the minute details, were given at Sinai, not just the general context, the 7th year and this rest, and it's a wonderful thing to have a shvita, to have a rest period of the land. No, every single detail, what will be in the 5th year and the 6th year and the 7th year, and what goes through all the details that relate to it, that are listed in the verse. Not all mitzvahs are given that way. For example, the mitzvah of tefillin, it just says you'll tie a sign next to on your hand, and you'll put it as a frontlet between your eyes, and that's all it says about tefillin. The fact that they are black boxes with leather straps and have the Shema in it, so we don't actually see that in the verses of the Torah. But in fact, every single detail of every single mitzvah was given at Sinai, not just the general context, and then the details were made up subsequently. The details also were given at Sinai. So here, says the Midrash, the mitzvah of Shemitah, the sabbatical year, becomes a teacher to all the other commandments, because just as this particular mitzvah was given not just in its general structure, but every detail relating to the mitzvah is listed in the verse. Likewise, all the other mitzvahs were given not just in a general way, but with all the details also coming from Sinai. So, just as with the sabbatical year, both its general principles and the minute details were given at Sinai, so too with all the commandments. Their general principles, as well as their minute details, were given, ordained on Mount Sinai. That's what Rashi quotes. But the obvious question that still remains after answering this is, all that you've told me is that one mitzvah was taken as an example, given with all its details, and that becomes an example that teaches us that all the other commandments were likewise given with their general statement and with all their details at Sinai. The question that remains is, why did we select this mitzvah to be the teacher? I said before, tefillin. Tefillin was given in a very general way in the verse, and we learn from the sabbatical year that tefillin and tzedakah and Shabbos were given with all their details on Sinai as well. But why did we select this mitzvah to teach us that? Why didn't we take the law of Shabbos and teach us all the details and then learn from Shabbos to all the other commandments? We still left with the question, what is unique about the Shemitah laws, the laws of the sabbatical year? What is so unique about this mitzvah that makes it the best example to be able to teach us that the details as well as the generalities were given at Sinai, and so to all the other commandments? Why is this law of Shemitah, the sabbatical year, the best example and selected to teach us this important detail relating to all the details of every other commandment? And there are a whole lot of answers. So one of them is that there's a parallel between the sabbatical year and the 49 years, the 7 times 7, which relates to Jubilee year, and Sinai, because both of them have this concept of 49. Remember, we left Pesach time and we waited for Shavuot. In between, what we're presently doing, we're counting the Sfirat HaOmer every night. How many days? 49 days. So there is something uniquely associated with the Sinai experience, that there are 49 years in the sabbatical cycles leading up to the Jubilee year, and there's 49 days that led from Pesach to Shavuot, the experience of the Exodus and the experience of Revelation at Sinai. So 49 becomes the common, it's the mitzvah chosen because look, there's a common denominator, the 49. Secondly, this is what the Gemara in Kiddushin tells us, that in fact, this law of Shemitah didn't happen for many, many years. Because the Gemara in Kiddushin says that challah, the mitzvah of taking a certain part of the dough and giving it to the Kohen, happened after 40 years. It never happened in the desert because people didn't eat challah in the desert. What did they eat? They had a special menu called manna. The first time they were baking breads was when they came into the land. So only 40 years after the giving of the Torah did they ever have the commandment to perform challah. It happened 40 years later. The Gemara then continues and says, Truma, 54, because after 40 years, it took 14 years to settle the land until every tribe was settled. And none of the mitzvahs relating to Teruma happened until the last tribe was settled. So in actual fact, Truma didn't happen for 50 years, 54 years. Shemitah didn't happen for 61 years. Because after the 54, you had to count 7 years, 61. Yovel only happened after 103 years. So in actual fact, when the laws were given at Sinai relating to the Jubilee year, it was not relevant and practical for the next 103 years. Imagine. And that's the emphasis in saying that it was given in all its details in Sinai, because what we're saying is that even the mitzvah that wasn't relevant for the next 103 years, all the other mitzvahs were going to be relevant much sooner, either immediately or within the next years. But even the Jubilee year mitzvah, which only kicked in and became relevant after 103 years, was given with all its details at Sinai. So for sure, the other mitzvahs that became relevant much sooner or immediately were definitely given with all their details. So why did we choose the mitzvah of Shemitah and the Jubilee year, Yovel year, to teach us that all the details were given at Sinai? Because it's the one that you would least think would have to be given at Sinai. It was only going to happen in 103 years, so we could learn the details later. No, the details of even the mitzvah that would only kick in after the next 103 years was given at Sinai. A third reason that is unique to Shemitah is that it has something about this law that proves that it's not man-made. Because Moshe Rabbeinu promises, and he says, you'll keep the 7th sabbatical year, and God will give blessing in the land that you will be able to survive from the yield of the 6th year. It'll cover you for 3 years, for the end of the 6th, for the whole 7th, and into the 8th, and the first year of the next cycle. No human being could make that promise unless it came from Hashem. So there's something about faith and bitachon and belief that is embedded in the mitzvah of the sabbatical year, because it came with a commitment from God to the human being to say, you keep this mitzvah and I'll take care of you. And that could only come from God. No human being could make up. So we took the mitzvah that is particularly associated with emunah, with faith. And the reason why this law was chosen that I love most is this final one, and that is that Shemitah encapsulates what is the whole theme of the Torah. Not just a mitzvah, not just another mitzvah, but this mitzvah actually includes the three pillars on which the whole world lives and stands and supported. What are the three pillars that hold up the whole world? They are our connection to Hashem, our connection to ourselves, and our connection to others. And look at how all of these three things were found in the laws of Shemitah, because it was the fulfillment of it was so based on the dependency on Hashem, belief in Hashem. No farmer would readily just say, I'm not going to plant a whole year. And the fact that he did that was because he had emunah. He had tremendous faith in Hashem. He also had due diligence to work for the 6 years. 6 years you work, the 7th year you don't work. There is this interdependency between the effort of a human being, not folding our hands and saying Hashem provide, but not thinking that everything is up to me and I can manage things without God. Chas v'shalom. I depend on Hashem. And the third thing, so my effort, belief in God, and the third thing is what happens in that 7th year with all the produce that grows. The trees are producing oranges or apples, so they're happening anyway, even though you're not working it, there's a lot that grows in the field. Who does that go to? It goes to the poor. So we put in our own effort, we believe in Hashem, and we remember our responsibility to take care of one another. The children of Hashem look after each other. All these three themes, human effort, belief in God, and commitment to the needs of other people around us, are embedded and encapsulated in the mitzvah of Shemitah. And that's why, according to this final fourth reason, this mitzvah was chosen to be given with all its details at Sinai and presented that way, and teaches us that every other mitzvah was likewise given with all the commandments and details. Why was this particular mitzvah selected to teach us? Because there's something about Shemitah that represents the theme of the whole Torah. We have to put in our effort, we have to depend and believe in God, and we have to care for one another. Those are the three important pillars of the entire Torah. And then it says, if you sell to your fellow or you buy from your fellow's hand, you shall not defraud one another. You shall not defraud one another, but you shall fear God. What's the duplication? You shall not defraud, you shall not defraud, you shall fear Hashem. So the Midrash says the first verse, don't defraud, refers to financial fraud. That you're not allowed to tell a person that he's getting something, he's getting a pound, and you only give him half a pound or half a kilo. The first verse refers to financial fraud. The second verse that we said just above, quoting one verse apart, 3 verses apart, why does it say again, don't defraud? It's talking about speaking hurtful words or giving bad advice. So you can defraud somebody, not just by going and taking their money or giving them short change, but when you advise somebody to do something and it's not the right thing and you're actually causing that person harm, and you will say, but how do you know? Like I said it, how do you know what I was thinking? How do you know what I was trying to do? I told you what I thought at the time was the right thing, but you gave bad advice and you caused that person harm. That's why that second verse continues and says, and you'll fear Hashem. And so many of the commandments in this Shabbos' reading ends off that way, fear Hashem. Because in each of those examples, a person might say, who will know what my intention was? Maybe I didn't intend to do the person harm. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I thought that it was a good share to buy when I told him to buy the worst share. And I told him to invest in a stock that was completely falling apart. Buy Eskom shares, right? So maybe I didn't intend any harm. So it says, fear God, because God knows exactly what we're thinking. And in all the areas that we think that human beings would never know, so I can never ever be accountable, because all of these things are happening inside of my mind, inside of my heart. Nobody knows. It ends off and says, Hashem knows. Hashem knows exactly what you intended to do. If it was a genuine mistake, it was a mistake. But if you intended to defraud a person by telling them to sell when it wasn't in their interest, or to buy when it was against their they're good. So you have caused fraud. And that's why it says it twice. There's fraud with financial, stealing something, and there's fraud by causing a person harm by giving them the wrong advice. This is a Hasidic word, a thought from Reb Bunim of Pshischa, one of the great Rebbes, who said, you shall not defraud one another. He takes the fraud element and sees it as a person who is a fraud. He says, legally, it is only forbidden to defraud somebody else. But a Chassid, he must go beyond the letter of the law and take care not to delude and defraud oneself. It's a very powerful thought. Sometimes we assess ourselves and we give ourselves a report card that's much better than we really are. Don't defraud ourselves means don't misrepresent yourself. Don't think inside of yourself that you're something that you're not. It's terrible to misrepresent to somebody else, and that's certainly legally. But beyond the letter of the law is don't defraud yourself. Know who we are. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. Don't walk around, strut around with all the supposed strengths and religious accomplishments and religiosity and tzidkus and righteousness when it's not the case. Know yourself. Each of us should be able to look in the mirror and know exactly who we are, our strengths and our weaknesses, but don't delude ourselves to think we're something we're not. So that's beyond the letter of the law, because to do it to somebody else is legal. To do it to oneself, know who we are. And certainly my teachers in yeshiva would always say, just don't get carried away with yourself. Don't pretend. Don't be pretentious. Be real. Be honest. Show yourself as you are, rather than pretending to be much more frum, religious, or holy, or kind than you really are. Don't defraud yourself. Now from the Maharal, it says that they are my servants, they are my servants, says Hashem, whom I took out of the land of Egypt. They cannot be sold into slavery. So the Maharal says at the time of the Exodus, God made freedom the inherent and eternal state of the Jew. Freedom is something that has to be a definition of self. We're free to serve Hashem. From that point on, no power or force on earth can subvert our intrinsic freedom. So when we came out of Egypt, something happened in freedom that affected the world forever. Even if, God forbid, we were in difficult circumstances again, we were freed in the sense that we were given a value system, we were given the Torah, we were given a headspace, we were given an opportunity to see what it's like to live free. Even if, God forbid, in a subsequent generation or time or place, that would be taken away from us, we still would never, ever be back as we were in Egypt, in a dark, dark place where we actually didn't know the Torah and we didn't know about speaking to Hashem. Something now inherently switched and changed in the definition of who we are as people. Now I'm coming back to the term that we said before, which was an oxymoron, that says you are a Geir and you're a Toshab. A Geir means you're a stranger. A Toshab means that you are a citizen, that you inherently belong here. So which one is it? Are we strangers or are we citizens? And this is how we explain it. There are elements that are temporary, and therefore you're a stranger. In what way? If you want to sell your field for 60 years, the answer is no, cannot. 50 years. If you want to make decisions that are forever, you don't have a right to make decisions forever because it doesn't really belong to you. You are a stranger. You have to know that you're not the total master and the total owner. God is. And at the same time, you are a Toshav, you are a citizen, which means that you will always have permanent rights to the land because Hashem is guaranteeing it. In your mistaken decision, you might decide to sell your land to somebody else or to even outside of the Jewish people, and that would be lost forever. So the fact that God took away your capacity and your power to sell the land, which you could think is an infringement of rights, it's a taking away of your inherent right to do whatever I want. But as a result of not being able to do whatever you want, the land will always be attached to you because Hashem is going to reserve it for you. So that's why you're a Toshav. You're here attached to the land forever. In some of the decisions which you might have made, which could undermine your connection to the land, God doesn't let you do it. So your hands are tied. You're a gay, you're a stranger. You're not totally in control. God is in control. In that sense, you're a stranger. But as a result of God keeping and reserving it for you, you become a Toshav. The land will always be attached to you. So we are a Geir and a Toshav, we're both. Okay, so we've discussed the emunah, the faith, that is so inherent in the mitzvah of Shemitah that a person would decide not to work because God said don't work, and that is the source of blessing. When the whole time, the 6 years, the only way that I have a source of blessing is when I do the hard work that I have to do. So now suddenly I'm told not to work, and that's going to be the source of blessing. It takes a tremendous amount of faith. And there's a beautiful analogy, which you might have shared once, relating to a person who is hitching a ride. The Uber driver comes by, or the wagon driver comes by, and the person gets onto the wagon, and he has this huge trommel, a chest, a trunk, that is filled with obviously some very heavy material. And the person gets onto the back of the wagon, he puts the trunk, the suitcase, on his lap, and the wagon driver turns around and sees that the person is red in the face, breathing heavily, is hardly able to survive the load that is on his lap. So he turns very kindly to the person sitting at the back of the wagon, and he says to him, why don't you put your suitcase down on the floor of the wagon and not have to hold it, because you're obviously taking strain. The passenger turns back and says, no, you're so kind that you were ready to give me a lift on your wagon. I don't want to trouble you with my suitcase as well. So the wagon driver says, yeah, that's what you're thinking? When you're sitting on my wagon and you're holding the suitcase on your lap, it's all on my wagon. Everything about this is on my wagon. So it's an analogy used that sometimes we stand in front of Hashem and we say, Hashem, no, I don't want you to get involved in my business because I'll take care of that. I don't want to be beholden. I don't want to have responsibilities. I don't want to think about all that stock I'm going to have to give. Hashem, take care of everything. But this area over here, I'm in charge. That's like the guy sitting on the wagon thinking that when he puts the suitcase on his lap, it's a less load or less responsibility to the wagon driver. Everything about our life is on the wagon of Hashem. Everything about this world is part of Hashem's wagon. There is no place that is void of Hashem. We shouldn't imagine that we can take care of anything without Hashem. And the mitzvah of Shemitah tells us, yes, you work for 6 years, and the only way you'll succeed is through your work, and you have to work. But the abstinence of work, removing yourself from work in the 7th year, shows that you believe that even the 6 years when I worked, it wasn't because of me that I succeeded. It was only partially because of me. I have a partner called Hashem. And it's only by virtue of Hashem's blessing that my efforts are able to succeed. This year, Hashem says, don't put in that effort. You'll have the blessing anyway. So I want to talk about chukim, which is the word used in the beginning of the second portion that we read, the Shabbat. And it says that first it says in the Talmud that when it says, if you'll keep my commandments, it's really not saying if you keep, and if you don't want to keep, you don't keep, but really it's a plea from Hashem. Please keep my commandments. But it doesn't just say keep, it says, in Bechukotai telechu, if you walk in my statutes. And the word for statutes, which is different to commandment or mitzvah, chok, refers to those mitzvahs which are an absolute decree, which are even inexplicable. And it's related to another Hebrew word, chok, same word with a different connotation, which is to be engraved. Chakika in Hebrew is when you engrave something into stone, you chokek, you engrave it in. So what does it mean, engraved? So there's an aspect of the Torah that is inked onto our soul. When we use ink, we write something on to ourselves. We understand and we feel it, but it remains something additional and extraneous to ourselves. But letters engraved in stone are forged in the material, not on the material, but in the material itself. The words are stone, and the stone are the words. It's all part and parcel. It's not an additional, extraneous material. And what Hashem is saying is that the Torah that we love and that we live should be like a chok. It should be engraved into us. It's a dimension of the Torah that is engraved into our very being. It expresses a bond with Hashem that is not an added dimension to life, but defines life itself. And interestingly, that when it comes to ink on paper or ink on anything, eventually the letters wither. If you look at tombstones, they go back many, many decades, the writing eventually starts withering. But the engraved element, the fact that the stone actually carries the letter in the stone itself, that doesn't get, even if it gets covered over, grime and grit goes in there, you clean it, you jet it with water, and you can once again see the letters, because the letters are in the stone. Our connection to Hashem should not be one in which something extraneous is superimposed onto our being. We are, and then we have an element that is also our religious attachment to Hashem. But rather we should feel our connection to Hashem as so inherent, so innate, so one with God, that we are, the stone is the message and the message is the stone. The Jew is part of Hashem and Hashem is part of our lives. Not something superimposed, but the actual essence of who we are. It says that Hashem tells us to walk upright. I've broken the bars of your yoke, and I've made you as a human being walk upright. So Reb Dover of Mezerich, who was a student of the Baal Shem Tov, he says that an animal walks on all four, and it's not by chance. It's symbolic. It walks on all four because when it walks, it faces the ground. Because earthiness and materiality is all that it really knows. Where's the next blade of grass coming from so that it can graze and can eat? An animal looks down because that's its world. A human being, by design, is shaped to walk upright so that our eyes behold what is above. Man walks upright, for man was born to gaze upon and aspire to the heavens. So there's an animal tendency inside of ourselves, which is to draw us down, to look lower, to look at what draws us further and down into the materialism of this world. And there's a part of ourselves that has a capacity to dream about spiritual energy, about holiness, about connection to Hashem. And that's why a human being walks upright, because our very stature, our very structure is to enable us to see what's higher rather than to be totally focused and absorbed in what is beneath us, what is lower than us. And then it speaks about what happens if, God forbid, you don't follow Hashem. You don't have me engraved in your soul and in your being. And you actually decide to walk. And the word that is used is you walk casually with Hashem. So if you walk casually with me, says Hashem, I'll walk casually with you. We'll meet in the corridor sometimes, but we won't feel the connection to one another. If you detach yourself, to happen to chance upon God once in a while, but not really think about connection to God every single day of your life, you walk casually. When you meet, you meet. In a difficult moment, you think about God. If that's how you treat me, I will treat you, says Hashem, likewise, casually. So it says, all sins derive from the sin of insignificance. When a person ceases to be sensitive to the paramount importance which Hashem attaches to his life and deeds. The beautiful advert on the Jewish, on Chai FM, where it says when Hashem decided that he'll make mountains and he'll make all the beautiful creatures of the world, he also decided that he needed and wanted one of you and us, each and every one of us. We're here for a reason, we have a purpose. And one of the huge causes of failure is when we think we don't really matter. It's not important. I don't really matter. So that's not humility. We think that we're being humble. Well, I'm like nothing. No. If you think you don't matter, then you are questioning why God put you in this world. It is the ultimate arrogance. It's saying that I can decide why I'm here, why I'm not here. It really means I can do whatever I want. I'm not beholden. But when we are humble enough to say, I do matter, why? Because Hashem put me here. I have a relationship with Hashem. I have a responsibility to fulfill Hashem's mission in this world. When we don't, and we say, it's all about me, and I can do whatever I want. I walk casually with God. The most terrible of punishments is for God to indulge the sinner this vanity, and for God to say, okay, have it your way. What happens to you is really of no significance to me. I don't really care. For Hashem to act towards him as if he really does not care what happens to him, that would be the worst punishment. Worse punishment than any punishment we could think of is that we don't really matter. I've said it in many different contexts that the opposite of love in this world, which we often think is hate, what's the opposite of love? Love is to want to be attached and connected, and hate is when you want to be separate. But the opposite of love is not hate. It's bad. Hate is bad, but it's not the opposite of love. The opposite of love is indifference. If, God forbid, we give a message to the child, not that I'm emotionally angry and frustrated, but I actually don't care. That's the worst disassociation. When a teacher says to a student in a fit of anger, the worst things and the wrong things, you can apologize for that and you can work on that, and the emotion can calm down and you can fix it. But if you become cold and indifferent and you say, I actually don't care, just get out of my class, I want nothing to do with you, that's total disassociation. When, God forbid, two human beings are not talking kindly to one another, it's bad. But at least they're engaging with one another, and there's the possibility of turning the tide. But when you walk away and say, I actually don't care, I don't care, I don't feel in any way I have any relationship with you, what are you going to say to the person? Fix it. I don't care. I told you I don't care. So I'm not going to work at fixing a problem. I don't have a problem because I don't care. And that's the worst possible disassociation. If a Jew says to Hashem, I actually don't care, and God says, you know what? I will act with you as if I don't care. God forbid. That would be the worst punishment, worse than any Gehenna, hell, worse than anything, is if, God forbid, our relationship with God deteriorates to the point that we don't care. We don't care, and God forbid, God pretends or acts as though he doesn't care. May Hashem never do that. Now, one of the things that happen, this is one of the punishments that is mentioned in this terrible, harsh section of the second reading of this Shabbat, where it talks about all the terrible things that could befall us if we don't behave appropriately. It says, I'll scatter you amongst all the nations. So the Gemara says that in actual fact, there is something virtuous and good and something enabling, positive, about God scattering us around the whole world. God did a kindness to the people of Israel that he scattered us amongst all the nations. Since we are dispersed, we could never really be destroyed. In Egypt, we were all subject to Pharaoh, the Meshuggah, the madman, megalomaniac, who enslaved us, but every single Jew was there. If, God forbid, he exercised his will, every single Jew, God forbid, would be subject to his law. But when God spread us all over the world, and we've seen it through history, this region came under terrible pressure, and another region of Jews, where Jews lived, was unscathed. So at least that way, spreading us around would enable to ensure that at least some part of the Jewish people will always be preserved. That's what the Gemara says. Secondly, it says the people of Israel were exiled amongst the nations only in order that converts should be added to them. So the Gemara actually says that Hashem put us in all the different places, in South Africa, in Africa, in Australia, all different places, so that we'd come into contact with the world, and we would even be able to redeem and bring back some of the souls that need to come back to the Jewish people, had we all been isolated from the world. In Israel, as beautiful as that would be for our personal experience, we wouldn't be impacting on the entire world. So Hashem put us all over the world, not only as a punishment, but in order for us to have an impact on society. And the Hasidic teachers said that the converts that we're talking about over here is not only the people that convert to Judaism, but we have a power to convert the material elements of the world and redeem sparks of holiness that are contained within them. So when we are active in South Africa, wherever we might be, so far away on the other side of the world, far removed from what we would call home, which is Israel, so we have a capacity to bring about converts, not only when we convert a person who decides to go on the path to embrace Judaism, but to constantly convert materialism into something holy. Take leather straps, make them into tefillin. Take wax candles and turn them into the introduction of Shabbos. We have constantly the ability to find what is latently within the material resources of this world, redeem the holiness within it by utilizing that physical piece of material in the service of Hashem. We're running out of time, but we almost got to the very end. So I'm going to stop sharing and say thank you, everybody, for joining. Really happy that we got together once again. Have a beautiful Shabbos. And please, God, Shabbat Chazak, the Shabbat of strength. At Great Park, we're having a Unity Shabbos. Join us if you can. We'd be so happy to see you. Have a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful week ahead. God bless.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Scott, Rabbi.